Moving to a virtual RAN solution can help mobile operators prepare for future innovation and growth, allowing them to more easily develop new applications and services or leverage third-party cloud-native applications as they upgrade and scale their networks to meet increasing user demand. But what is the market opportunity for vRAN, and how exactly should telcos proceed? I'm Guy Daniels, Director of Content at TelecomTV, and joining me now to discuss the benefits of vRAN are Sandro Tavares, Head of Portfolio Marketing Mobile Networks at Nokia, Anil Bhandari, VP of Product Management with Altiostar, Keith Johnson, President and COO of Parallel Wireless, John Baker, Senior Vice President Business Development at Mavenir, and Gary Ashworth, Senior Director Red Hat Ecosystems with Red Hat. Hello everybody, very good to see you all. Thanks for joining us in this discussion. First of all, let's establish why Open RAN. What is the market potential of Open RAN, and what are the associated challenges and opportunities? I'd like to ask you all this quick question and get your brief views on this one if I could. Sandro, could we start with you?
Absolutely. So the way we see is that, first of all, as we all know, while the radio access technology evolved, the interfaces across the different building blocks, they became more closed, right? And then that together with a concentration on the vendor side made the options out there on the market become very limited. And that created the whole push around Open RAN that we see today. We believe at Nokia that Open RAN will happen, right? And it will happen because our customers want it, and it goes through, of course, there is always a look into potential TCO savings, but also a desire of having more options out there on the market and a faster innovation pace. And also there is a strong desire coming from the governments to use Open RAN to create a more secure telecom supply chain. And also what I see quite often is them using these as also a possibility of developing a local industry around 5G in each country. So there is a lot of traction on the market, and that's why we believe that Open RAN will happen pretty soon.
Thank you, Sandro. Anil, what's your view of Open RAN? Why Open RAN?
I think Sandro pretty much articulated benefits of Open RAN. If operators have to sustain the cycle of innovation, they have to move to Open RAN architectures. In addition, I would say that with Open RAN, our view is that operators will have better security because of the use of open yet secure interfaces. So Open RAN definitely provides for better security, and also where the world is moving, right? Operators will have to support multiple different kind of applications, which again requires use of architectures that are flexible to support those use cases, some of which are known today and some of which are unknown. So that's the way. I mean, we believe that Open RAN is a necessity for operators.
Thank you, Anil. And Keith, why the interest in Open RAN? Why should operators be interested in it?
Well, so we think there's two big goals of Open RAN. There's the desire to drive down cost, and there's the need to unlock innovation and new topside opportunities. And it turns out that the way that we've chosen to go about that is through disaggregation. And it's through that you can take larger, more monolithic pieces of products, systems. You can separate hardware from software from services. And in doing that, you allow innovation to emerge where it can. And so we think that innovation can be in the form of cost reduction through automation, or it can be through providing new services that they can monetize through their customers. And so the key, in our view, is really to enable this simultaneous cost reduction, as well as the ability to pursue new opportunities by allowing innovation to emerge in just the part of the product ecosystem where it's natural to do so.
Thank you, Keith. And John, any additional thoughts as to the drivers behind Open RAN?
I think a lot of the points have been covered, but I sort of like to pull it back to some fundamentals. Open RAN is actually not a technology. Open RAN is about opening interfaces and, essentially correcting a problem that was, really created in 3GPP many years ago, where, you'd get partial specifications and they were not interoperable. So, as the ecosystem closed down with takeovers and companies going out of business, you really ended up with a limited number of suppliers, which are, constricting the marketplace. Once you get through the definition of open interfaces that are interoperable, you get to then really how it's being implemented, and that's the next big step, if you like, in the Open RAN story, is about virtualization. Now, you can build an Open RAN network if it's got open interfaces with custom hardware in the same way you build a network today. So, I was sort of laughing with somebody yesterday. You see all this excitement in the industry about Open RAN, but in reality, all we've done is open an interface. The next step, where the technology jump is using virtualized technology to actually replace the custom hardware. So, two things going on, opening of interfaces, correcting a standardization issue, and then, where technology, compute power is caught up with, hardware processors, then the ability to then represent as much as possible in software.
Thank you very much. And Gary, final initial thoughts from you about Open RAN as to what the challenges and opportunities are.
Yeah, and there's been lots of good things mentioned by the rest of the panel already. So, the thing about innovation and open being open, I mean, this has been part of Red Hat's DNA from the beginning. So, there's a lot of opportunities. I do think there are one of the key things is about the ecosystem and driving and powering that ecosystem. And there are a few challenges as well. When we talk about disaggregation, there will be many more partners in the ecosystem, but we really need to be coherent in how we pull this to, a solution that integrates all these different partners together in terms of an open solution. But, the opportunity is huge, and I think we're going to continue to see that around many of the points that have been raised by the other panel. But I think for me, top of mind is really around sort of innovation, getting new services to market quickly, and driving this growth that we're seeing.
Great, thanks, Gary. Well, let's introduce vRAN into this as well. When we look at vRAN and Open RAN, about how they enable new opportunities for operators, I'd like to have a look a little bit more detail about what we see as the barriers and dependency for adoption. Keith, would you like to share your thoughts about the barriers that vRAN and Open RAN might face?
Sure. So I think those barriers, at least the first barriers we have to pay attention to, almost follow directly from the answers to the previous questions. If it's all about disaggregation, getting pieces of your system from different vendors, at some point those things have to come back together, right? A solution has to be whole. And so one of the first barriers is about how the customer will produce the aggregated solution. How will they do the integration, and how will they manage the assembly of all those pieces from each vendor who's best of breed? And so when we think about that, it's not just a technical problem, it's a problem with people and with business process. The vendors have to learn a new way to work with the customers. The customers have to learn a new way to work with the vendors, as well as with the services partners in the ecosystem. And so, we think that is one of the primary barriers to entry. If there was a second, it comes around the topic of hardware availability and radio availability. There's been a few comments on ecosystem, and we think that the ecosystem must be central in any sort of disaggregated environment like Open RAN. And so we as an industry can't move forward in fits and starts. We have to move forward together with all the different pieces that used to be provided by an integrated solution.
Thanks, Keith. And Gary?
Yeah, we talk about vRAN. I still think, we've obviously got challenges and, some historical players in that market space. So There are challenges around that, but I think the advantage for me is just the first move advantage around some of these pieces as well is going to be huge, because when we start talking about diversifying into things like mech and some of the other opportunities as well, and AR, VR, entertainment, some of these other pieces, it really is about first mover advantage, I think, and gaining some of those critical wins and use cases in the marketplace out there. And I think that for me is going to be really important. And again, it's all around innovation, which is fantastic, and it will drive new revenue streams for service providers and new market opportunities for all of us. But I think that's quite important in terms of, I think, grabbing this advantage quickly, and I think that's what will make a difference.
Thank you. And John, what barriers are you seeing?
Yeah, I think some of the biggest barrier actually is is a people barrier in terms of acceptance to new technology. And I think our CEO Pardeep Kohli uses a great analogy. That in your room you have a light, you have a light socket and a light bulb, and in reality, I can plug as many different vendor light bulbs into that socket as I like. I don't have to go replacing the system. And to that extent, all we're doing is we're taking something that's in a custom chip and representing it in software. As I say, providing the interfaces are open and interoperable, how you actually implement that RAN technology is entirely up to the technology inventor, if you like. And I think that's where in some respects the industry sort of is coming off the rails. If you can meet the performance and the KPIs that are being produced with the existing hardware, then the two should be interchangeable. And so to that extent, the old vendors, if you like, and the new vendors should be able to mix and match. And I think that's where, interoperability, testing, KPI management, and ensuring these interfaces stay open that allow many parties to play, and the best technology will win. And clearly, virtualization and getting the benefits of internet technology in terms of scaling the hardware platforms is a key benefit of this. So I think it's about keeping everything in perspective, and how engineers and CTOs, etc., take a view of this adoption.
Thank you, John. And Anil, you have some additional views.
Yeah, I just want to make 2 points. One thing I want to say is that disaggregation certainly brings this perceived challenge, that how now you come out with an end-to-end solution that provides same level of performance as what is available from a completely packaged solution. But at the same time, what I would like to say is that once these blueprints have been developed, where testing has been done with a set of hardware, open and virtualized RAN potentially can provide deployment models which are much more simplified and faster to deploy. And Rakuten has demonstrated that. Second point that I would like to say is that definitely I agree with the comments made by other panelists that it is important for industry to come together and develop processes and maybe ecosystem so that IoT testing can be done, and then that way these solutions then they become plug and play kind of solutions. So yeah, there's something that industry can do to help this whole thing.
Thank you, Anil. Well, look, let's move on. Sandro, how do you see the role of industry alliances in shaping RAN's future, such as the ORAN Alliance, 3GPP, TIP, etc.?
It's fundamental, right? It is extremely important that as we move as an industry, that we make sure that we are all developing the same standards, so we can really get to this vision of mix and match that was already discussed in the panel today. So we believe that, especially like the work that we're seeing going on at the ORAN Alliance with the different work groups defining all the interfaces, like the open front haul interface, the mid-haul, the E2 interface towards the RIC. This is fundamental that we really focus on getting these right and continue evolving them, of course, so we do not have issues with interoperability in the future. So this is kind of like the fundamental part of making O-RAN real, right? And really making sure that we can get to a world where we can have solutions from different vendors interoperating in the same network as we all want to see.
Thank you, Sandro. And this interoperability issue is so important here. Anybody else like to pick up on the role of associations with this? Yes, John.
Yeah, so I think the industry is slowly sorting itself out, and I think you're seeing a sort of alignment between O-RAN Alliance, TIP, Open RAN Policy Coalition, and all very active. I think there still is a fundamental issue that needs addressing is the relationship of all these groups to 3GPP. The one thing that we must not allow as in the industry is for disaggregation, if you like, of the responsibilities of 3GPP and holding the ecosystem together. But in some respects, it's how you take a body that's producing standards and and somewhat incomplete standards and get them complete. And I think there's still an effort, if you like, to solve the root cause problem, if you like, of why Open RAN really came about in the first place. And bring all of these groups together so that the energy, if you like, that's going in the O-RAN Alliance is feeding the results back into 3GPP, and they're becoming part of the 3GPP standards. So great efforts from everybody today. I got to be honest, that everybody's enthusiastic, the work's getting done, but we must sort of hang on to the fundamental roots of how this industry started and bring all the pieces back together again.
Yes, we really have to keep this going. Anil, back to you with some comments there.
So I think I agree with what John and other panelists have mentioned. O-RAN is doing a great service, and they are helping develop these open interfaces. And then in addition to O-RAN, I think TIP is also playing a great role. They are helping develop the hardware ecosystem, and again, that's very important for success of Open RAN.
Gary, can you share any results from the work that Red Hat has done recently regarding improving total cost of ownership from virtualizing RAN? Because this is one of the key drivers for virtualizing RAN.
Yeah, I can. I can certainly share the details around the work that we've done with ACG, but even anecdotally on the call in terms of looking at the TCO, and you would expect in terms of virtualizing RAN, driving the cost out, a massive reduction in the amount of platforms required to run these pieces. So, I think we all agree that, the savings are there and we can easily quantify those. I think, in terms of the feedback we're getting from the field is very strong. Clearly with service providers and with the ecosystem in terms of not only sort of driving the opportunity, but in terms of having a horizontal platform and then being able to quickly and clearly OpenShift is important for us as a hybrid cloud platform. But being able to implement workloads or containers on those quickly and new services being up quicker, more innovation and quicker time to market, and again, fundamentally driving some cost out of that. So certainly we can share that. We've got some really strong data in terms of not only the sort of TCO cost savings, but also in terms of things like time to market advantage. The other thing as well, which is quite surprising, is when you look at this, and even if you look at things like power consumption as well. When we're looking at 5G and new services, the amount of power required within a service provider to deliver those and drive those is phenomenal. So it's a constant battle in terms of driving ecosystem credentials and driving some of those costs out as well. So, I think we all agree this has got to be the path forward. It's just in terms of what's important. And we found this is different as well from service provider to service provider. Tier 1s, tier 2s, tier 3s have been looking at this differently as well in terms of rate and pace of adoption. And we talked about this a little bit earlier on the previous question in terms of that there will be a mix as well. It's not all going to virtualize overnight. It's not all going to change. So how can it all live together? We talk about things like SLAs and providing those as well, and the cost around those. So it is a complex calculation in terms of that, but it's very significant, certainly for the service providers.
Great. Sandro, what feedback are you getting from the field, from your customers? And also, what are you recommending to service providers?
Yeah, of course, there is a lot of interest, right, from our customers. Of course, that we do also have a pretty strong start with Rakuten in Japan, but now talking to customers all over the world, you see a growing interest about starting to experiment with the RIC, experiment with the open front haul, and really getting their hand into this new reality, right? What we have been recommending is that, especially if you're talking about operators that are already out there with their networks, is that they take a stepped approach, right? And we are enabling that by basically bringing the open interfaces into our solutions that are already on the market, so they can really start experimenting, bringing other players in, bringing RIC accepts into the picture, and really start trialing with the technology and start creating their plans around adoption. We don't think this should be a huge break into the evolution of the network. They should actually bring these into their plans and evolve constantly towards this new scenario.
Thank you, Sandro. And I'd love to hear what feedback others are getting. John, what are you hearing from your customers?
Yeah, I think we've been really sort of pushing the whole total cost of ownership for 3 years now, and when we started out, we were sort of very much predicting the 40% capex, 37% opex savings in Open RAN type systems, and that's actually been borne out now by real experience, as Anil said, with Rakuten. We've just released a new white paper actually that talks about cost savings, TCO ownership, and bringing the transmission architecture into that as well. But when you get back to the fundamentals, it's all about the virtualization platform, containerization, and how you get the pooling gains out of the common elements. And if you're efficient with your software architecture, the right virtualization platform, then the pooling gains that you can potentially get from a consolidation of the virtualized elements is significant. And when you look at all the other network elements, the radio in the tower stays the same, the transmission technology is staying the same. The real key pieces changing is the CUDU software architecture and replacing the baseband software, and that's where the focus in innovation really needs to stay. In terms of getting the cost out of these networks. So, certainly, Mavenir has been sort of in that space for the last 15 years, placing virtualized core networks and now bringing the benefits into the RAN space.
And Keith, from Parallel Wireless's market perspective, what are you hearing from your customers? What are telcos telling you about this?
We hear very similar stories that when you deploy Open RAN or vRAN, you realize significant savings when it comes to both CapEx and OpEx. And one thing I might add is that you often have to cast a wide net when you do that TCO analysis, and you have to think creatively. It's often the case that in some sort of data center, you get a lot of value out of server consolidation and having more portability of workloads. If you think about something at the base of a tower, if you think about baseband, the same use cases don't immediately apply. There may not be 10 or 20 servers at the base of a tower. Of course, there almost never are. But the benefits come in a different way, right? The benefits come through using common orchestration, having more advanced, more sophisticated management. And those benefits may seem small, but you have to remember that often managing a very remote system is much more costly. And so we found that time and time again, when we look at it, if we cast the broadest possible net, we see significant advantages across every part of the network, from the base of the tower all the way into the data center.
Let's move on, because all this requires a lot of investment in terms of work and resources from telcos. So, how should a service provider start planning for cloud-native microservices-based virtual and Open RAN infrastructure? There's a lot of elements to consider here. How should they start to bring in containers into the network? What about orchestration? What's the role of DevOps, CI/CD? It's a huge list, and it perhaps somewhat daunting for a lot of the smaller telcos. But how can telcos start? Is there any overarching advice you can give to telcos about how they start putting all this together? Who would like to be brave enough to take this one first?
So how do you start with Open RAN? And my answer seems a little bit silly, but the answer is just start. There are so many things that present opportunities, so many things to learn. There will be challenges along the way, of course, but there's a learning curve that goes along with adopting a new technology and a new approach. And so far and away, the best advice that I could give any operator is to just start. Find part of your network which is reasonable, start a trial, start a POC. It will help you understand a new way to operate with your suppliers. And it'll also help you go through all the different learnings you have to go through, right? It's been mentioned that maybe one of the biggest challenges to Open RAN adoption are the people. People learn through experience, they learn through activity. And so if there's one thing that I could tell people, it's just start. The second thing that I would add is that it's time to start thinking about Open RAN truly as software. And so you need to start adopting software practices in your organization that may be not familiar in every way. I've talked to one operator who told me they could at best accept one release of software a year. That's the highest velocity that they could accept new product into their network. And I think we'd all agree that Open RAN seeks to deliver innovation and value far faster than that. So topics like CI and CD are central, and starting to build competency around them, I think, is a good way to get an early head start.
Great advice, Keith. Yes, just do it. One release a year is way too slow. Sandro, it seems like one of the big challenges, as always, is cultural.
Absolutely, absolutely. And building upon what Keith just said, which is, I totally agree, you have to start by experimenting with it, but like really having a strategy shift and looking into your overall cloud transformation strategy as a service provider is very important, right? Because, I mean, we face the exact same situation when we are cloudifying the core, where you have not only to, it's not only about moving software into a commercial off-the-shelf architecture. It's not only about deploying containers. You really need to transform your internal processes, right? And this passes through a lot of training. This passes through actually designing a holistic strategy to transform the way the company operates, right? And that is very important. If you're just looking into isolated projects, you're never going to see the full benefit of this transformation, and you might as well have problems with it, right? So it really requires a lot of activity around the entire company and a realization that this is a totally new way of working.
Gary, over to you.
This is where one size does not fit all. We're working with, there's one service provider in particular, and they've only got 10 CUs worldwide to support a whole 5G network. So it's a very different approach. And we did talk a little bit earlier about Rakuten, who's a strong customer, I think, for most of us on this call. They're deploying over 4,000 far edge servers for both DU and CU. So it's a very different approach in terms of that. So there really isn't one size fits all. But going full circle, I like the very first comment is just get on with it. I think we can, we talk about it forever, but just start on and get on with it, I think is key.
Absolutely. Anil?
What I would like to say is that most of the operators are already on this journey of digital and cloud transformation of their networks. They are already deploying their core network and core components in the cloud. RAN is just another workload. So our view and experience is that by deploying RAN in cloud, it is going to rather simplify the operations, because now the radio engineers, they don't have to focus on troubleshooting hardware, because that's all virtualized, and their focus now has to be only on the application performance related aspects. But I also agree that definitely there is need to develop additional expertise as far as the operations team is concerned, and they have to have some background maybe in programming rather than just being plain operations engineers.
Thank you. And John, advice from you to telcos about how to start this process?
Yeah, I think I totally agree with just get on with it. But there are certain gaps in here where vendors actually can help. The biggest challenge that we see with people getting their arms around Open RAN is you're moving from what seems to be a solid piece of silicon that's got a certain performance to a compute platform that's very dynamic, and for these transmission engineers in terms of how to determine capacity of all of these functions sort of becomes a challenge. And I think if the industry needs to do something fairly quickly is get some design tools out there of how to take a process and determine the number of compute cores that a certain 3GPP process will take. And that's where we see the biggest struggles. But I know people are doing things about it, but we need to help these engineers sort of make that transition.
Great. Well, let's move on and look at how we're helping telcos to move all this into their operational networks. Now, along with Intel, Red Hat has set up a CNF and VNF onboarding lab to mitigate the risks in testing and speed up this whole integration process. Anil, what kind of benefits do you think this brings service providers, and where do you see telcos themselves currently in this integration process?
So this is a very good initiative from Intel and Red Hat, and this lab helps in onboarding of these CNFs and their functional and performance testing. And so as a result of this, operators are going to get fully tested and hardened CNFs.
Let's move on to security. Does the attack surface increase as we disaggregate the network, as we disaggregate CU and DUs? And with many partners involved in the solution, does this compound the problem? Are we increasing the risk in the networks, or are we looking to mitigate this? And if we are, how are we increasing security in platforms and networks? Anybody want to start with the security issues?
Yeah, so I sort of smile over this one, and we're going from a scenario where potentially with all these closed systems, you actually can't see what's going on, to opening up these interfaces where each individual company that's contributing to the system architecture can test their own products and ensure that they meet all the security requirements, and because the interfaces are open, then the operator can actually see what's going on as well. We are improving the security from an increased surface area. This is a sort of a technology evolution issue where, from an O-RAN perspective, there are a lot more interfaces that are being talked about to get these interfaces open, and so in that sense, you're increasing the number of interfaces that have got to be tested. But as vendors, we need to stay responsible for our product security-wise. And a lot of these interfaces anyway are sort of behind the firewalls and in operators' networks. So no, I think openness is all about improving security, improving responsibility, and allowing innovation to take place where you can plug and play fully tested products in there. But bottom line, it comes back to vendor responsibility to ensure that their products are secure and being responsible.
Thank you, John. Yes, anyone else agree with? Yeah, it's Keith.
So the question is, does Open RAN and do open interfaces fundamentally make a product, make a system less secure? And I think it's fair to look at that and somewhat superficially conclude that the attack surface area must have increased, and so therefore it must be less secure. But I don't think that thesis holds. In the past, it's been largely security through obscurity. Right? Just the fact that you can't see something, it was viewed to give us a perception that it was secure. But I think one thing we're getting here is we're able to shine the light of day on all these different pieces of the platform. And whether it's through more transparency, whether it's through accountability for individual operators, individual vendors, whether it's instead because there'll probably less commonality of implementation across all the different pieces of the stack. And that in turn ensures that if there's a penetration in one place, you can't so easily propagate. I think that diversity increases security. I think that transparency increases security. And I think we should have that lens when we look at it.
Yes, thank you, Keith. Anyone else want to comment on this? Are we actually improving our security by disaggregating here?
So I agree with what has been said. With disaggregation and open interfaces, now there is observability. So it is possible to see what is going on between different network functions on these interfaces, and that improves security. Secondly, ORAN is ensuring, in ORAN we are all working together as a community, and we are ensuring that all the interfaces are secure interfaces. And if we are discovering any issues, again we are working together to ensure that these are fixed immediately, rather than brushing it under the carpet. So basically, Open RAN, in our view, brings more security rather than compromising the security.
Just a final thought, and I totally agree with what my colleagues have just said. And the fact that a system is open doesn't mean necessarily that it's less secure. Actually, does not mean that it's less secure. In fact, I mean, we have examples of completely closed systems that are deemed to be insecure, right? So it is really about this community working together, and every single vendor that is part of the Open RAN community taking all the steps to make sure that their products are safe, that their products are secure. And of course, we're all working on the interfaces together and making sure that they are secure as well. So I do not see any reason why would anyone say that an Open RAN environment is less secure than a closed environment.
Thank you. And over to you, John, again.
Yeah, sorry, I just want to add one final comment. This whole thing about, numbers of threat service, etc. If you go to the core, I think, we were totaling up the other day, there's like 600 interfaces in the core of a mobile network. And, the industry has got those standards open, they interoperate, etc., etc. So, if it can be done in the core with 600 interfaces, we can certainly do it in the RAN side with probably about 10 interfaces. So, in some respects, it should be business as normal, and again, vendor responsibility.
Well, final quick thoughts from all of you before we wrap things up. Gary, I'm going to start with you. What is the role of the ecosystem to support customer success in virtual RAN adoption?
I think, well, as I mentioned earlier, for me, the ecosystem is absolutely crucial to have a diverse ecosystem of interesting, compelling workloads and solutions, and to really innovate in the marketplace. We're looking at this great opportunity. We talk about 5G and beyond, and MEC, and all of these other pieces as well. It really is going to be around innovation and first time to market. So certainly for Red Hat, it's something that it's core to our business. We continue to invest, you heard, in terms of not only the ecosystem, but how we support the ecosystem with testing and labs, and that's continuing to focus. When I look at the internally the budgets for next year and the focus, it's around ecosystem, it's around more investing, it's around ensuring that we sort of bring innovation to market. And this is something that has always been core of Red Hat's DNA, about being open and Open RAN, and it's everything we've continued to drive to do. And I think that's not only working with the ecosystem, it's working with the service providers as well. It's working with developers. It's working with GSIs. The ecosystem is very broad in terms of how can we get on with it, as we talked about earlier, and bring some of these some of these, I call them solutions, but these changes to the market, whether it's Open RAN, RAN, or some of these other pieces as well. So ecosystem is absolutely crucial for us at Red Hat, and we're going to continue to invest, and I'm delighted to be a part of that.
Thank you. And Keith, final thoughts from you on the role of the ecosystem to ensure the success of virtualized RAN adoptions?
So I don't think you can have open without ecosystem. I think they're linked, and they're linked forevermore. And so, when I think about the responsibility of the ecosystem, we're talking about making sure that there is that vendor accountability, that we are delivering what we say we're delivering, because in many ways, the industry of Open RAN will be a rising tide that will lift us all. And so each operator needs to be able to perceive that there's an ecosystem giving them support, when previously it was perhaps only one vendor. When I look at what played out over the course of perhaps 15 or 20 years in the data center, it took a long time for this ecosystem to evolve. And I think one thing that's interesting is that the same sort of life cycle is happening now in the context of RAN, Open RAN, and vRAN. And I think one thing we should do is we should be lucky to be able to look to the leadership of companies like Red Hat and others who have this experience not only in the RAN space, but in the data center space. I think they can lift some of the common patterns that built an effective ecosystem there and help to take this industry up to a new level.
Thank you, Keith. Sandro, final thoughts from you?
Yeah, so for sure, the ecosystem plays a fundamental role in making sure that Open RAN really happens, right? And it is very important that we continue developing this ecosystem further. We do have a great opportunity with the XApps of the RAN Intelligent Controller of bringing new innovation into our market. Basically, any software developer can start writing code now to optimize RAN processes, to create new services, and so on. So beyond the ecosystem of vendors that are looking into, let's say, the main building blocks of the Open RAN network, which is for sure important, we also going to have the possibility of having new entrants coming and bringing new innovation to our environment. So this is extremely important for the success of Open RAN.
Thank you. And Anil, we've got to keep supporting and developing the ecosystem then.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I would say is that for the success of Open vRAN, one of the obligations that I see is that we need to work with customers in consultative manner because they are used to today buying everything from one vendor, whereas in Open RAN model, they have to buy radios and cloud platform and the software. So it's very important for when I talk about Altiostar, for us to work with customers in a consultative manner and help them navigate this whole process.
Great. And John, you get the final word on what is important for the ecosystem to help support successful adoption of vRAN.
Yeah, this has been a great discussion, and I thank to all the people on this call. Essentially, in terms of the pioneers, if you like, of Open RAN. If you take what we've done over the last 3 years, we've taken one interface, essentially, turned the industry and disrupted the industry to the extent it's political, it's technical, commercial, and innovative. In a sense of allowing the industry and the faith in the industry to continue. It's all about keeping these interfaces open, encouraging collaboration, encourage trust in partners, and no finger pointing. This comes back to getting together and working out the solutions and making our customers successful. So if nothing else, is about openness and trust and innovation.
Well said. Thank you, John. Well, that is all the time we have, unfortunately. Thank you all very much for taking part in our discussion today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.